Secret of true success, a father's advice to his son. Have you ever found yourself questioning what it truly means to be successful? I mean, real success, not just the flashy stuff we see online, the cars, the houses, the constant stream of "look at me, I've made it" posts on social media. But what if I told you that true success isn't something you can measure with your bank account balance or the number of followers you have? What if it's something much deeper, something that's often overlooked, yet it's the key to unlocking a life that feels fulfilled, meaningful, and truly successful? In the next few minutes, you're going to hear a story that will challenge everything you think you know about success. Stick with me, because the answer you've been searching for is closer than you think. The key to real success, something far beyond fame or wealth, could be hidden in one conversation between a father and his son. Imagine this: it's a quiet evening, just as the sun begins to set. The air is thick with the weight of unspoken thoughts, and the father, a man who's seen both the highs and the lows of life, sits down across from his son. There's a look in the father's eyes, a mix of wisdom and concern, of pride and regret, because he knows something that his son doesn't. He knows that the path his son is about to take could either lead him to the kind of success that makes you feel alive with purpose, or the kind that leaves you hollow, forever chasing something that can't be caught. This is not a typical advice from father to son story. It's not about the typical lessons like work hard, never give up, or don't be afraid of failure. Those things are important, yes, but there's something more, something that many people never figure out, no matter how much they achieve or accumulate. And the father, in that moment, is about to share the one piece of wisdom that could change everything. Now, I know you're probably thinking, I've heard motivational speeches before, I've read the books, I've seen the documentaries. So why should I keep watching? What makes this different? Well, what if I told you that the biggest secret to true success isn't about chasing after a dream but understanding something about yourself that most people overlook? What if the answer to becoming successful, not just in the sense of material wealth, but in a deeper, more lasting way, is rooted in something you've been taught to ignore all along? You're about to discover it, right here. But first, let me ask you this. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself if the version of success you're chasing is even your own? The son in this story is just like many of us, eager to prove himself, caught up in the hustle, chasing the external markers of success. He's been raised in a world where the loudest voices tell him that success is about the job title, the paychecks, the awards, and the recognition. It's a world that constantly tells him to climb higher, reach further, and keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. But deep down, he feels something is missing. He can't put his finger on it, but he knows that the more he achieves, the emptier he feels. It's a familiar struggle, isn't it? You hit one milestone, and it feels great until you realize that the next mountain is already looming in the distance, and you're still not satisfied. You're still wondering, is this it? This is where the father's words will shake everything the son thought he knew about success. In a world that constantly pushes us to do more, to be more, to chase more, the father will reveal that sometimes, true success comes when we step back and ask ourselves the hard questions. What really matters? What's the point of all the striving if, at the end of the day, we still feel disconnected from ourselves and the world around us? What if success isn't about accumulating things or checking off a list, but about finding balance, fulfillment, and peace with who we are, right here, right now? These are the questions that the father has wrestled with throughout his life, and now he's about to pass on the answer to his son, an answer that, if understood deeply, could radically shift the way we approach life itself. As the father speaks, the words he shares aren't just for the son, they're for all of us. You see, the son represents more than just one individual. He represents everyone who has ever felt like they're running on a hamster wheel, doing everything they can to achieve more, yet never feeling quite satisfied. How many of you have ever asked yourself, what am I really chasing? Is this the life I want? If you've ever felt that, this story is for you. But here's where the real mystery begins. As the father begins to unravel his deep secret about success, something unexpected happens. His words aren't exactly what the son, or you, might have expected. They don't just challenge the idea of what success is, they flip the whole concept upside down. And just when you think you have the answers, the father will drop a bombshell that might make you question everything you've believed about life and success up until now. What if everything you thought you knew about achieving success has been wrong this whole time? What if true success isn't something to be chased after at all? At this point, you're probably wondering, what's the father's secret? What is the one thing that could change everything? And you're going to have to stick with me to find out, because the secret isn't as simple as it seems. But one thing's for sure, it's going to change the way you look at success, and it's going to do it in a way that will feel like a wake-up call, something that you can't ignore. In the next part of this story, you're going to hear the father's advice that will reshape everything. It's not going to be the typical pep talk you've heard before. It's not about working harder, grinding more hours, or pushing yourself to the limit. This is something deeper, something that will resonate with you whether you're just starting out on your journey or have already achieved some of the things you thought would bring you happiness. Are you ready to hear the truth? To hear the one piece of wisdom that could change your entire perspective on success? The answer lies ahead, but it's not as simple as you might think. Stay with me, because the father's advice isn't just going to make you rethink success, it's going to make you rethink everything. But here's the catch: before you get the full picture, before you discover the secret of true success, you're going to have to follow the son on his journey as he processes these life-altering words. And trust me, it won't be easy. The real question isn't just what success is, but whether we're ready to accept the kind of success that brings peace, fulfillment, and true happiness. So, stay tuned and see where this conversation between father and son leads, because the journey toward understanding true success is about to begin. And you won't want to miss it. The son sat quietly across from his father, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edges of his coffee cup, as if trying to feel the warmth seep through to his thoughts. His mind was elsewhere, racing through the latest challenges of his life. Only days ago, he had received an offer from one of the top firms in the city, an offer that had the potential to propel his career into the upper echelons of corporate success. On paper, it looked like everything he'd ever dreamed of. He could already picture the shiny office, the high-powered meetings, the kind of life people like his college classmates would envy. But in the pit of his stomach, there was a gnawing feeling he couldn't shake, one that told him something didn't quite add up. His pulse quickened when he thought about how his peers were already congratulating him, showering him with praise, and telling him how lucky he was. They couldn't see it, though, this feeling of emptiness that seemed to creep in every time he imagined himself living that life. It wasn't about the money, and it wasn't about the recognition. It was something else, something deeper that he couldn't articulate. As he looked at his father, a man who had weathered his own storms of success and failure, he wondered if his father could sense the unease that had taken root in him. There were things about his life that no one really knew: how he had buried himself in his work for years, always pushing forward but never feeling truly fulfilled. The relationships that once mattered had withered away, replaced by late nights in the office and weekends spent catching up on emails. His friends had faded into the background, and the few he kept in touch with were constantly moving in different circles. Even his family, despite their best efforts to support him, felt distant, as though they were standing on the other side of a glass wall, watching him struggle but never really able to reach him. He wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, he had lost his connection to the things that used to ground him. What was the point of it all, he often asked himself, when nothing he achieved ever felt like it was enough? The father, who had noticed the subtle changes in his son, had long suspected that this moment was coming. He knew what it felt like to chase after things that seemed like the key to happiness, only to find that the pursuit itself left you emptier than before. His own life had been a testament to that. He had built a successful business, a company that had started from scratch and grown into something substantial. He had been celebrated in boardrooms, lauded in the media, and respected by colleagues, yet he felt none of the joy he had anticipated. The more he climbed the ladder, the more he felt isolated, as if he was losing touch with the things that truly mattered. He had learned the hard way that success, when measured by the wrong standards, could leave you utterly unfulfilled. And now, watching his son standing on the edge of a similar path, he knew it was time to share the wisdom that had taken him years to discover. But the challenge was not just in the advice itself, it was in how to deliver it without alienating the son who had been trained to believe that more was always better. The father's thoughts drifted back to a conversation he'd had with a former colleague, a man who had once been his closest friend in the business world. That friend had it all: the wealth, the family, the status, but the pressure of keeping up appearances eventually took its toll. He had seen the cracks forming long before anyone else did, the exhaustion in his friend's eyes that no amount of success could mask. It wasn't until after a particularly hard fall in his career that the man finally admitted to the father, "I had everything I thought I wanted, but nothing that mattered." That confession had stuck with him ever since, like a haunting echo in his mind. It was a message he couldn't ignore, and now, years later, he was determined not to let his son make the same mistakes. But as the father prepared to speak, he noticed something different in his son's eyes today, something more than just uncertainty or confusion. There was a glimmer of fear, a fear that had been creeping in since his son had first mentioned the new job offer. The son was trapped in a cycle of wanting approval from others, a cycle the father had seen countless times before. It was as though he had become a slave to the expectations that others had placed on him, whether those expectations came from his peers, his professors, or even his own inner voice that kept telling him that success was the only thing that mattered. But deep down, the father could see that the son was torn. He didn't know whether he was pursuing his own dream or someone else's version of it. And that uncertainty was eating away at him. Just as the father opened his mouth to speak, a knock on the door interrupted their quiet moment. The son's phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced down to see a text message notification. It was from his old college roommate, Adam. The message was simple but striking. "Are you sure about this offer? You're going to give up everything for that." Adam was one of the few people who had always kept it real with him, never hesitating to challenge his decisions, even when they clashed with what was expected. It was exactly the kind of message the son didn't want to hear right now, but somehow, it felt like a sign, like a reminder that there were still questions he hadn't answered, things he hadn't figured out. It was as though Adam, from miles away, had sensed the same unease that had been festering in him for weeks. The phone buzzed again, and this time, it was his mother, asking if he was free to catch up later in the week. It seemed innocent enough, but the son knew it was more than just a casual check-in. His mother had always been concerned about his workaholic tendencies, always asking him why he didn't take more time for himself or spend more time with his family. The messages, the reminders, the questions, they all seemed to be pushing him in a direction he wasn't sure he wanted to go. And with every ping of his phone, the son felt the weight of the decision growing heavier. The father, seeing the hesitation in his son's eyes, let the silence hang in the air for a few moments longer. This was the moment, the critical point where everything could shift. He knew that his son was standing on a precipice, not just in terms of career, but in terms of his own identity. Was he going to continue down a path laid out for him by others, or was he going to listen to his own heart and discover what his true success looked like? As the tension between father and son built, the father realized that the words he was about to share were not just going to change the son's life, they were going to change everything. The real question now was, would his son be ready to hear them? As the father and son sat in the dim light of the living room, the air grew thicker with the weight of the conversation yet to come. The son's phone buzzed again, a constant stream of notifications he couldn't quite ignore. But this time, it wasn't just texts or messages from old friends. The alert that popped up was a news headline from the business world, an announcement about a major shakeup at the firm where he was about to join. At first, the headline seemed like a small ripple, a passing bit of corporate news. But as the son read further, his heart began to race. The company had just made a huge, controversial move, shifting their headquarters overseas, laying off a large portion of their workforce, and restructuring in a way that seemed off. The kind of off that made you question everything, from their corporate practices to their core values. The son felt a cold shiver down his spine. This was not the opportunity he thought it was. This was something else entirely. As he stared at the screen, he wondered if this was all a coincidence. After all, he hadn't accepted the offer yet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was trying to send him a sign. He had been so focused on the idea of success that he hadn't stopped to consider the potential consequences. What if this company wasn't what it appeared to be? What if the job he had been chasing was a trap, a gilded cage dressed up as opportunity? Was he really about to walk into a corporate environment that didn't align with his values, just for the sake of climbing the ladder? He felt the weight of the choice pressing harder on him now, the realization that success in the wrong context could feel hollow. The father, noticing the tension in his son's face, tried to read the situation. He had seen this look before, that subtle shift in his son's demeanor when something didn't sit right. But before he could speak, something unexpected happened. The son's phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message, it was a call from a blocked number. He hesitated for a moment, but the urge to answer overtook him. Maybe it was another clue, another sign pointing him in the right direction. He pressed the answer button, but the voice on the other end was muffled, distorted, and almost frantic. "Don't do it," the voice whispered, just loud enough for the son to hear. "Don't take the job. It's a mistake. You don't know what you're getting into." Then, just as quickly as it had started, the line went dead, leaving nothing but silence and a pounding heartbeat in his ears. His mind raced. Who was that? How did they know about the offer? Was it a prank, or was there something more sinister at play? His first instinct was to shrug it off as a hoax, but deep down, he couldn't help but feel that there was something more to it. He looked up at his father, who was watching him intently. The father had noticed the change in his son's demeanor. This was more than just a simple career choice. There was a deeper, more personal struggle playing out, one that had yet to be fully revealed. But before the father could ask what had happened, the son quickly changed the subject, as if trying to distract both himself and his father from the weight of the conversation. But the father wasn't fooled. He could sense that something was wrong. The following days were a blur of unanswered questions and growing uncertainty. The son couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this company, to this job, than met the eye. He did some digging, reaching out to former employees, trying to piece together a clearer picture of what was really going on behind the scenes. But each time he got close to uncovering something strange happened. Important documents seemed to disappear, files he had saved on his computer vanished without a trace. Emails he had sent to colleagues were mysteriously returned to him, marked as undeliverable. It was as if someone, or something, was actively working to stop him from learning the truth. And as if that weren't enough, his sources, people he had come to trust, began to back off, growing evasive and distant. The walls were closing in, and every lead he tried to follow seemed to evaporate before his eyes. Then, one evening, just as he was about to meet with an anonymous whistleblower who claimed to know the real story behind the company's recent restructuring, the unexpected happened. He received an urgent message from an old colleague, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. The message simply read, "You need to stop digging. There are things about this company you don't want to uncover." No explanation. No name. Just the stark warning. The son's heart pounded as he stared at the screen. Who was this person? And why were they so adamant that he stop searching? Was this another red herring, another attempt to throw him off track? Or was this the real danger, the first sign that the company's secrets were much darker than he had imagined? The father, who had been quietly observing his son's mounting frustration, finally broke the silence. "You're getting too deep, son," he said, his voice low but firm. "Maybe it's time to step back. Not everything is meant to be uncovered. Some truths are better left buried." His words hit the son like a punch to the gut. Was his father trying to protect him? Or was he hiding something himself, something he hadn't shared? The son looked at his father, unsure if he could trust him completely. He had always admired his father's wisdom, but now he couldn't help but wonder if there were things about his own past that the father wasn't willing to share. Was he holding back, trying to shield his son from the harsh realities of the world, or was there something more, something hidden beneath the surface? The tension between them was palpable, and for a moment, neither knew what to say. The son knew that his father had a history in the business world, a history that, as a child, he had never truly understood. Had his father been involved in something shady in the past? Was this why he seemed so reluctant to encourage him to pursue this path? And if that was the case, could the father's advice even be trusted? As the night wore on, the son found himself standing at a crossroads. His mind was swirling with questions, with doubts, and with a deep, nagging feeling that the truth was just out of reach, hidden in layers of secrecy, deception, and betrayal. He couldn't tell if the pieces of the puzzle were aligning or if he was just chasing shadows. But one thing was certain, the deeper he dug, the more the stakes seemed to rise. The danger was real, and whatever was lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect opportunity was much darker than he had ever anticipated. And just as he was about to make a decision, the doorbell rang. Another visitor. Another twist. This time, It wasn't a phone call or a cryptic text. Someone had come to see him in person. The question was, who were they, and what were they about to reveal? The doorbell rang again, its sharp chime echoing through the otherwise quiet house, shattering the stillness that had settled over the father and son. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air felt thick with uncertainty, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to break. The son hesitated before standing up and walking toward the door, his heart racing in his chest. His mind was still a whirlwind of questions. Who could it be at this hour? And what could they possibly want? The father's eyes followed him, his face unreadable, but his hands tightened into fists at his sides. Whatever was about to happen, he knew it would change the course of their lives. When the son opened the door, standing on the other side was someone he hadn't seen in years, Sophie, an old friend from his college days. Her appearance was unexpected, but the look in her eyes told him that whatever had brought her here was far from casual. She was breathless, as if she'd been running, and her eyes darted nervously over his shoulder into the house, before quickly meeting his gaze. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low and urgent, barely above a whisper. "It's about the company, and your offer. You don't know what you're getting into." The son's pulse quickened. He had thought he was the only one who sensed something was wrong, but here she was, someone who had been out of his life for so long, showing up at the most inconvenient time with the same cryptic warning. Sophie had always been sharp, more intuitive than anyone else he knew, but he hadn't expected her to be involved in this tangled mess. She had worked in a completely different field after college, far removed from the corporate world he had immersed himself in, so why was she here now, talking about the very company he was about to join? Sophie didn't wait for him to invite her inside, she simply brushed past him and walked into the living room, her movements quick and almost frantic. "You need to listen to me, now," she insisted. "There are things you don't know, things they're hiding, and they'll stop at nothing to keep it quiet. You don't want to get caught up in it." The son's mind spun with questions. What was she talking about? And why was she so sure that the company he was about to join had secrets? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had barely scratched the surface of what was really going on. The signs were all pointing to something much bigger and far more dangerous than he had imagined. Just then, the father stood up, his face hardening with a mixture of concern and recognition. He knew Sophie, he had met her a few times during the son's college years. She had always been an idealist, a sharp thinker with a reputation for speaking her mind. But even so, he had never expected her to be involved in this. "What exactly do you know about this company?" the father asked, his voice steady but edged with tension. Sophie's eyes flickered toward him, a shadow crossing her face. She was holding something back, but what? Why was she acting so evasive? Sophie hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "It's not just about the company," she said, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might overhear. "It's about what they're connected to, something much darker. There are people involved that you would never expect. Powerful people who have a lot more at stake than just business profits." The words hung in the air, thick with implication. The son could feel his stomach tighten. What was she talking about? Who were these powerful people, and what did they have to do with his future career? The more she spoke, the more the mystery deepened, and with every word, the danger seemed to escalate. But just as Sophie seemed about to divulge more, the phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. The son looked at it with growing dread. This was the third call from an unknown number today. Was it another warning? A threat? Or something more sinister? He had to make a decision, and fast. He could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting as every new piece of information seemed to complicate the truth further. Who could he trust? Sophie, who was acting like she knew something deeper. His father, who had been quiet but whose eyes seemed to harbor his own secrets. Or was it someone else, someone still hidden in the shadows, pulling the strings behind the scenes? As he picked up the phone, a sense of unease washed over him. This was no longer just about a career choice, it was about his life, his future, and the tangled web of lies, deception, and betrayal that seemed to be closing in on him from all sides. The voice on the other end was distorted, much like the one he had heard before. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as if whoever it was didn't want to be heard clearly. "Stop digging," the voice warned, cold and threatening. You don't know who's watching. And you don't want to find out. The line went dead before he could even respond, leaving the son standing in the middle of the room, his thoughts spinning. Sophie, watching the exchange, stepped forward again. You need to listen to me, now. There was urgency in her voice, but also something else, fear. It was the kind of fear that made her seem almost desperate, as if she knew something that could cost her everything. The son felt a chill creep down his spine. He didn't know who to trust anymore, Sophie, who was warning him but also holding back information, or his father, whose calm exterior seemed more and more like a mask. Something wasn't adding up. You're not the only one they've been watching, Sophie continued, her eyes narrowing. They've been keeping tabs on me too. I've seen it. I've heard things. You have to stop before it's too late. At that moment, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was more insistent, almost as if someone was determined to make their presence known. Sophie stiffened, her eyes darting to the door. The son felt a wave of dread wash over him. What was happening? Why was everyone suddenly showing up, warning him, trying to stop him from finding out the truth? Was it all connected somehow? And if so, to what? As the son walked toward the door, his mind raced. Who was on the other side this time? And what would they bring with them? What piece of the puzzle would they add to the mystery? Could it be another ally, another warning, or perhaps something far worse? The tension in the air was so thick, it was almost suffocating, and the son felt as if he were on the verge of uncovering something that would change everything, yet, every time he got close, it slipped just out of reach. Each new twist seemed to raise the stakes, making the stakes feel higher, the danger more imminent. He had to act quickly, but each step forward seemed to bring him closer to a truth that could destroy everything he thought he knew. The questions kept piling up. Who was pulling the strings? What were they hiding? And most importantly, who could he trust when everyone seemed to have their own secrets? The doorbell rang again. The doorbell rang a third time, but this time, the son didn't feel the same rush of curiosity. It wasn't just a knock or a casual visitor anymore. The tension in the house had shifted, and every sound felt amplified, as though the world itself had become too quiet, waiting for something to break the stillness. He turned towards Sophie, who had gone pale, her body rigid with something like fear. It was different now, something more than just a warning, something that was escalating beyond anything they had discussed. She glanced at the father, her eyes wide and anxious. The father, too, seemed on edge, his usual calmness now replaced by something darker, an understanding that whatever was happening, they were all entangled in something far more dangerous than they had initially realized. The son swallowed hard, his throat dry. Who could be on the other side of the door this time? A part of him almost didn't want to know. Whatever it was, whoever it was, he knew it wasn't going to be the kind of visit that provided clarity or peace. He had been digging deeper, trying to unearth the truth, but now, with every passing hour, it felt like he was stumbling through a maze where the walls were closing in around him, tighter and tighter. He walked slowly toward the door, his mind racing. Was he being followed? Was someone watching from the street outside? The thought made his pulse quicken. He opened the door cautiously, but no one was there. For a split second, he felt a bizarre sense of relief until he noticed something on the doorstep. It was a small, plain envelope, nothing unusual about it, but it was placed deliberately, as if someone had dropped it off with care. The son picked it up, his hand shaking slightly as he brought it inside. Sophie was already moving toward him, her eyes scanning the envelope, her face growing even more tense. "Don't open it," she whispered urgently, but it was already too late. He ripped the envelope open, and inside was a single sheet of paper. There was no return address, no name, no logo, just a message scrawled in bold, hurried handwriting: "You're not safe. Stop asking questions, or it won't be just your job at risk." The words sent a cold shiver down his spine. He stared at the paper for a long moment, unsure of what to make of it. The message was clear, someone knew exactly what he had been doing, and they were threatening not just his career but something far worse. Sophie's breath caught in her throat, and she backed away, looking like she might be sick. This is what I was afraid of," she said, almost to herself. "You don't understand. They don't just want you to stop, they'll do whatever it takes to make you stop." The son's mind was a whirlwind of panic and confusion. What did she mean by that? Who were they? And why had Sophie, of all people, been so intent on warning him, almost to the point of fearing for her own life? The sudden weight of the message pressed down on him, like a vice around his chest. Was this just a random threat? Or had he unknowingly stepped into something far darker than he could have imagined? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he was no longer dealing with a simple career decision. This was no longer about a job offer or a business deal. This was about survival. And then it hit him with full force. He was in serious danger. The urgency of the situation surged through his veins like ice water. His heart raced in his chest, the thumping louder than his thoughts. He had been followed. The people who had warned him, the messages that had been sent to him, it wasn't just coincidence. They knew where he lived. They knew what he was doing. And they wanted him to stop at all costs. His breath caught in his throat as he suddenly realized something else. His mother had tried to reach him earlier, just before Sophie showed up. He had ignored her call, distracted by the flood of texts and the mounting chaos. But the call had been strange, too. It wasn't like her usual check-ins. This time, she had sounded rushed, panicked, as if something was happening that she couldn't quite explain. She had asked him to come over, to meet her. But he hadn't gone. He had been too caught up in the whirlwind of what he had uncovered to even think about it. But now, as the weight of everything started to settle in, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his gut. He had to call her. He had to find her. Without another word, he grabbed his phone and dialed his mother's number. The call rang twice before it went to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Panic gripped him, and he stood up, pacing back and forth. What if she was in danger? What if they had already found her? His mind raced, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. He couldn't stay here, he had to leave, he had to make sure she was safe. But just as he reached for the door to go to her, he felt a strange sensation, like he was being watched. He froze, his body tense with the sudden realization. It was like a pressure in the air, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. He glanced out the window, but nothing seemed amiss. The street was quiet, as it always was at this hour. Yet something felt off, like a subtle shift that made his skin crawl. Could someone be outside? Could they be watching him, waiting for him to make a move? He turned quickly, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Suddenly, the phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't a warning, it was something much more direct. It read, "She's not answering because she's with us now. Stop or she'll be next." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. His throat went dry, and his hands trembled as he dropped the phone. Sophie gasped from across the room, her face pale, as though she knew what this meant. The son's world tilted, the ground beneath him shaking as the truth began to sink in. His mother was gone. Whoever had sent that message had taken her. And now, it was no longer about the job, or the company, or the warnings. This was about his family, about people he loved and trusted, and they were willing to destroy everything to keep him from uncovering the truth. His heart pounded as he looked at Sophie, who was now visibly shaking, her eyes wide with fear. "What do I do?" he whispered, the question barely escaping his lips. Sophie's response was quiet but urgent. "You have to go after her. Now." The walls seemed to close in around him, the danger pressing on all sides. His every instinct screamed that he had to act, but where could he go? Who could he trust? He felt a deep, gnawing fear, the kind that twisted his stomach into knots. This wasn't just a job or a career anymore. It wasn't even about finding the truth. It was about survival. He was trapped in a web of lies, and no matter how hard he tried to untangle it, the truth was slipping further away. The questions had only grown more pressing, and the answers, if they existed at all, felt like they were just out of reach. The son's mind was spinning, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he stared at the phone in disbelief. The message had been clear, his mother had been taken, and the threats were now more than just vague warnings. This was real. But just as he was about to make a decision, to rush out the door and search for her, his father did something that froze him in his tracks. Without a word, the father walked over to the fireplace, his expression unreadable. The son watched him, confusion clouding his thoughts. His father had always been calm, even in the face of danger. But now, something was different. The man's movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as he reached behind a portrait on the wall, pulling it aside to reveal a hidden compartment. The son's eyes widened. What was his father doing? His mind raced, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in his father's demeanor. Why had he never noticed this compartment before? What was behind it? The father's hands trembled slightly as he opened the small safe hidden behind the picture frame. The son moved toward him instinctively, his pulse quickening. He felt an undeniable sense of dread, something he couldn't quite explain, but it was as if everything, every warning, every strange encounter had led to this moment. The father pulled out a thick envelope, its edges worn and faded, and handed it to his son. "Open it," the father said, his voice low, almost too calm. There was an edge to his tone, an undercurrent of something the son couldn't place. It was like a pressure in the air, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. He glanced out the window, but nothing seemed amiss. The street was quiet, as it always was at this hour. Yet something felt off, like a subtle shift that made his skin crawl. Could someone be outside? Could they be watching him, waiting for him to make a move? He turned quickly, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Suddenly, the phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't a warning, it was something much more direct. It read, "She's not answering because she's with us now. Stop or she'll be next." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. His throat went dry, and his hands trembled as he dropped the phone. Sophie gasped from across the room, her face pale, as though she knew what this meant. The son's world tilted, the ground beneath him shaking as the truth began to sink in. His mother was gone. Whoever had sent that message had taken her. And now, it was no longer about the job, or the company, or the warnings. This was about his family, about people he loved and trusted, and they were willing to destroy everything to keep him from uncovering the truth. His heart pounded as he looked at Sophie, who was now visibly shaking, her eyes wide with fear. "What do I do?" he whispered, the question barely escaping his lips. Sophie's response was quiet but urgent. "You have to go after her. Now." The walls seemed to close in around him, the danger pressing on all sides. His every instinct screamed that he had to act, but where could he go? Who could he trust? He felt a deep, gnawing fear, the kind that twisted his stomach into knots. This wasn't just a job or a career anymore. It wasn't even about finding the truth. It was about survival. He was trapped in a web of lies, and no matter how hard he tried to untangle it, the truth was slipping further away. The questions had only grown more pressing, and the answers, if they existed at all, felt like they were just out of reach. The son's mind was spinning, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he stared at the phone in disbelief. The message had been clear, his mother had been taken, and the threats were now more than just vague warnings. This was real. But just as he was about to make a decision, to rush out the door and search for her, his father did something that froze him in his tracks. Without a word, the father walked over to the fireplace, his expression unreadable. The son watched him, confusion clouding his thoughts. His father had always been calm, even in the face of danger. But now, something was different. The man's movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as he reached behind a portrait on the wall, pulling it aside to reveal a hidden compartment. The son's eyes widened. What was his father doing? His mind raced, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in his father's demeanor. Why had he never noticed this compartment before? What was behind it? The father's hands trembled slightly as he opened the small safe hidden behind the picture frame. The son moved toward him instinctively, his pulse quickening. He felt an undeniable sense of dread, something he couldn't quite explain, but it was as if everything, every warning, every strange encounter had led to this moment. The father pulled out a thick envelope, its edges worn and faded, and handed it to his son. "Open it," the father said, his voice low, almost too calm. There was an edge to his tone, an undercurrent of something the son couldn't place. It was like a pressure in the air, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. He glanced out the window, but nothing seemed amiss. The street was quiet, as it always was at this hour. Yet something felt off, like a subtle shift that made his skin crawl. Could someone be outside? Could they be watching him, waiting for him to make a move? He turned quickly, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Suddenly, the phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't a warning, it was something much more direct. It read, "She's not answering because she's with us now. Stop or she'll be next." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. His throat went dry, and his hands trembled as he dropped the phone. Sophie gasped from across the room, her face pale, as though she knew what this meant. The son's world tilted, the ground beneath him shaking as the truth began to sink in. His mother was gone. Whoever had sent that message had taken her. And now, it was no longer about the job, or the company, or the warnings. This was about his family, about people he loved and trusted, and they were willing to destroy everything to keep him from uncovering the truth. His heart pounded as he looked at Sophie, who was now visibly shaking, her eyes wide with fear. "What do I do?" he whispered, the question barely escaping his lips. Sophie's response was quiet but urgent. "You have to go after her. Now." The walls seemed to close in around him, the danger pressing on all sides. His every instinct screamed that he had to act, but where could he go? Who could he trust? He felt a deep, gnawing fear, the kind that twisted his stomach into knots. This wasn't just a job or a career anymore. It wasn't even about finding the truth. It was about survival. He was trapped in a web of lies, and no matter how hard he tried to untangle it, the truth was slipping further away. The questions had only grown more pressing, and the answers, if they existed at all, felt like they were just out of reach. The son's mind was spinning, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he stared at the phone in disbelief. The message had been clear, his mother had been taken, and the threats were now more than just vague warnings. This was real. But just as he was about to make a decision, to rush out the door and search for her, his father did something that froze him in his tracks. Without a word, the father walked over to the fireplace, his expression unreadable. The son watched him, confusion clouding his thoughts. His father had always been calm, even in the face of danger. But now, something was different. The man's movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as he reached behind a portrait on the wall, pulling it aside to reveal a hidden compartment. The son's eyes widened. What was his father doing? His mind raced, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in his father's demeanor. Why had he never noticed this compartment before? What was behind it? The father's hands trembled slightly as he opened the small safe hidden behind the picture frame. The son moved toward him instinctively, his pulse quickening. He felt an undeniable sense of dread, something he couldn't quite explain, but it was as if everything, every warning, every strange encounter had led to this moment. The father pulled out a thick envelope, its edges worn and faded, and handed it to his son. "Open it," the father said, his voice low, almost too calm. There was an edge to his tone, an undercurrent of something the son couldn't place. "I didn't want to tell you this," the father said, his voice suddenly tight with emotion. "But the truth is, your mother has been involved in this from the beginning. She didn't just disappear. She left, because she was part of it all along." The words hit the son like a punch to the gut. His mother had left. The person he had spent his entire life idolizing, the woman who had always been his anchor, had willingly walked away from him and from their family. She had known about everything that was happening, the threats, the danger, and she had chosen to leave. But why? Why hadn't she told him the truth? And why had she never mentioned anything about this? As the son stood there, trying to make sense of the revelation, his father continued, "She didn't want you to get involved because she knew how dangerous it was. She thought if she left, it would keep you safe. But now you've found out, and you're too deep in it to turn back." The son's mind was racing, his thoughts tangled in a million directions. His mother, the person he had trusted most, had kept secrets from him. And now, everything was falling apart. The life he had known, the simple, happy existence, was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. His father, the man who had been his protector, had been hiding the truth all along. And Sophie. Sophie had warned him, but even she hadn't known the full extent of the danger. She had been a part of the puzzle, but she hadn't seen the whole picture. "Why didn't you tell me?" the son demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "Why did you keep this from me?" The son could feel it, the weight of the decisions piling up, the weight of the truth he could no longer avoid. His father's words still echoed in his mind, but now, with every passing second, the situation had grown darker, more complex. The message on his phone, the warning that had been so blunt and chilling, had triggered something inside him. It was no longer just about uncovering the mystery of his mother's disappearance or the strange messages he had been receiving. It was about making a choice. A choice that, no matter what he decided, would cost him something. His pulse was hammering in his chest as he turned to his father, still holding that damn envelope in his hands. The man who had always been a pillar of strength, of unshakable resolve, now seemed like a stranger. There was a coldness in his eyes, something hidden just beneath the surface. It wasn't fear, it was something else, something far more dangerous, a quiet certainty that whatever was happening, whatever had happened in the past, was irreversible. And now, his son had crossed the line. He was in it, deep, whether he wanted to be or not. "You need to choose, son," the father said, his voice steady but tinged with something dark, something that made the son's blood run cold. "The truth you're after. It's going to destroy everything you care about. You're already too far down this path." The words were a slap in the face, but they weren't a warning. They were an ultimatum. And the son felt his throat tighten as he processed the meaning behind them. He had already made the decision to pursue the truth, to find out what had happened to his mother, to uncover the secrets that had been buried for so long. But now, it felt like he was standing at a crossroads, where both roads were filled with danger and uncertainty. What would he lose if he kept going? What would happen to those he loved? Was he willing to sacrifice his safety, his family, for the sake of a truth that might tear everything apart? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Sophie had returned, though he hadn't expected her so soon. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with anxiety. The moment she stepped inside, the atmosphere seemed to shift again, like something else had just entered the room, something the son couldn't quite put his finger on. He could tell something was wrong, something about Sophie wasn't quite right anymore. "I need to talk to you," Sophie said quietly, her voice shaking. She wasn't speaking to the father, who hadn't said a word since his last chilling statement. She was speaking directly to the son, as if she had been preparing for this moment. The son's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tight, his instincts flaring. Sophie hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward the father before she took a deep breath and spoke in a rush, as if she knew the weight of what she was about to say. "I know you're asking questions, I know you're digging deeper than you should, but there's something I haven't told you. Something I didn't want to tell you. But you have to know the truth. You have to understand that this whole thing, it's bigger than you think. And it's not just about your mother." The son's stomach churned. His thoughts were still spinning from his father's words, the unspoken truth hanging in the air. Now, Sophie, someone he had trusted, someone he had believed in, was about to shatter everything. She stepped closer, her gaze locked onto his, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not just a bystander in this. I've been involved. I knew about your mother. I knew about the danger. I knew, and I let you walk right into it. I thought you could handle it. I thought I could keep you safe." The son's mind reeled as the weight of her confession hit him. He felt betrayed, but more than that, he felt completely unmoored. Sophie had been a part of this, she had known about his mother's disappearance, about everything that was happening, and yet she hadn't said a word. The truth that had been slowly unfolding before him now seemed more elusive than ever, slipping through his fingers like sand. Was anyone in his life who they appeared to be? Was everyone playing a part in this twisted game? And now, Sophie had revealed something else, that she wasn't just an ally, but a player in the shadows. Before he could process her words, Sophie continued, her voice laced with regret. "I never wanted you to find out. I didn't want you to have to choose. But now, it's too late. You need to understand, this is your only chance. They're going to make you choose between the truth and your own life. And if you choose wrong, you'll lose everything. There's no coming back from this. Do you understand me?" The son stood there, motionless, his breath caught in his throat. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, confusion, disbelief. He wanted to shout at her, to demand answers, but all he could feel was the gravity of the decision looming over him. How was he supposed to choose between uncovering the truth and protecting the people he loved? Could he trust anyone anymore? Sophie's voice broke through his thoughts. You've seen the threats. You've seen the warning. They'll stop at nothing to keep you from digging deeper. And your father. He's been trying to protect you, trying to keep you safe, but even he can't protect you from them if you don't make the right choice. If you keep pushing, they'll come after you. And everyone around you will be in danger. The words felt like a punch to the stomach, and the son's hands clenched into fists. How could he protect them? How could he protect anyone if he was forced to choose between truth and survival? The stakes had never been higher, and with every passing moment, the noose was tightening around his neck. But the question still haunted him. Could he live with the consequences of choosing ignorance? Could he turn his back on everything he had learned, pretend it didn't matter, just to keep everyone safe? But then, a new message flashed on his phone, the notification pinging in the quiet room. He glanced down, his heart stopping for a moment. The message was from an unknown number, just like the others, but this one was different. It wasn't a warning, it was an order. You know what to do. Make your choice. Leave your father. Leave Sophie. Walk away, or you'll lose everything you care about. His mind raced, the pressure mounting with every word. He glanced at his father, who was watching him closely, his eyes filled with something the son couldn't place. He glanced at Sophie, who seemed to be waiting for him to make the inevitable decision. What was he supposed to do? What could he do? The walls were closing in, and no matter how much he fought it, the reality was clear: his life, the lives of those around him, were inextricably tied to his next move. But the choice was impossible. There was no right answer. No way to win. Only a world of consequences waiting for him, no matter which road he chose. As the tension in the room reached a fever pitch, the son realized something terrifying. The only thing more dangerous than the secrets he had uncovered was the truth of the ultimatum he now faced. The son's mind was spinning, his hands shaking as he stared at the message on his phone. Every part of him screamed to run, to escape, to do anything but face the reality of what was happening. But there was no escape. The walls were closing in, suffocating him, and with every passing second, the sense of urgency grew. The truth, whatever it was about to come crashing down on him in a way he couldn't avoid. He had already crossed the line, and now, he was racing toward a confrontation that would change everything. Sophie was watching him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else he couldn't identify. She knew this was the point of no return. She knew that once the son saw the truth, once he understood the full scale of the conspiracy, there would be no going back. But what he didn't know, what she hadn't told him, was that the conspiracy wasn't just about his mother, his father, or the messages he had been receiving. It was about something far bigger. It was about an entire network of people who had been pulling the strings for years, people who had never meant to let anyone discover the truth, and now, the son was at the center of it all. Who's behind this? The son demanded, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes searching Sophie's face for answers. Who's really pulling the strings? Sophie hesitated for just a moment, and that hesitation was enough to confirm everything he feared. She wasn't just a bystander. She wasn't just someone caught up in a web of lies. She was part of it. She had been lying to him all along. His breath caught in his throat as the truth began to form in his mind, but just as he was about to confront her, the door to the room slammed open. The father stepped in, his face grim, his eyes cold. There was something dangerous about his presence now, something that made the son's skin crawl. The man who had once been a protective figure, a steady rock in the chaos of life, was now a stranger. The words he had spoken earlier, the warnings, the veiled threats, they were no longer just warnings. They were the desperate moves of a man who had no more options. You shouldn't have gone this far, the father said, his voice low and lethal. Now, they're coming for you. You've forced my hand. The son's mind raced. Who are they? He spat. Who are you protecting me from, and why did you hide everything? His father's gaze never wavered, but his jaw clenched, the muscles in his face tightening. He looked almost pained, like every word was a struggle. But there was no turning back now. It's bigger than you think, he said finally. There's a network. People from all walks of life. People you never would have suspected. His voice cracked for a moment, and in that brief instant, the son caught a glimpse of the man who had been his father. I tried to keep you out of it, but you wouldn't stop. I tried to keep you safe, but now they'll come for you. And for everyone you care about. Sophie stepped forward, her face pale, her eyes haunted. The truth is, they've been watching you. Watching us. For years. They've infiltrated everything. Every institution. Every company. They know everything. Her voice wavered, and she swallowed hard before continuing. And they've known you were getting close. They won't let you walk away. Not now. The son's heart was racing, his mind screaming. What was happening? He had been chasing a mystery, but this was no longer a mystery. This was a war, one that he had never asked for, but was now trapped in. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered around him, and every answer just led to more questions. Why had his mother disappeared? Why had his father kept secrets? Why had Sophie stayed silent? And now, the terrifying truth was starting to crystallize. He wasn't just caught in the middle of something personal. He was caught in something far more dangerous. The conspiracy was not just about his family, it was about power. About control. About a force far too big for any of them to stop. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as the father turned away, his shoulders slumped in resignation. I didn't want you to be part of this. I didn't want you to know the truth, but now that you've seen too much, there's no going back. The son took a step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. Tell me who's behind this. Tell me why they're doing this. For the first time, the father's expression softened, just for a moment, as if he were torn between the love he felt for his son and the weight of the truth he had to reveal. But before he could speak, the sharp sound of a car screeching to a halt outside shattered the moment. The father's face hardened again, and he moved toward the window, peering through the blinds. His eyes widened in alarm, and the son could see the panic flicker across his face. They're here, his father muttered, more to himself than anyone else. It's too late. Suddenly, the son realized the gravity of the situation. His father wasn't just trying to protect him, he was trying to protect himself too. This wasn't just about keeping the son safe. It was about survival. And the people they were up against weren't just shadowy figures in the background, they were dangerous, powerful, and they had been pulling strings in ways the son couldn't even begin to understand. The man he thought he knew, the man who had been his protector, was now a part of something much bigger than he could ever have imagined. The door to the house burst open with a force that sent the son's heart into his throat. Two men, wearing dark suits and sunglasses, stepped into the room. The air was thick with tension as they surveyed the scene, their eyes flicking from the father to the son, to Sophie. They didn't need to say anything, their presence alone spoke volumes. We've been instructed to bring him in, one of them said, his voice cold and detached. No more questions. No more games. The son felt his blood run cold as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat. The men weren't just after the truth, they were after him, and they would stop at nothing to ensure he didn't uncover what they were hiding. His father had been right all along, there was no walking away from this. There was no turning back. The conspiracy was too vast, too far-reaching. But in that moment, as the men closed in on him, the son felt something shift inside him. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something deeper. A sense of resolve. He wasn't going to let them take him down without a fight. He wasn't going to let the truth be buried, no matter the cost. But as he looked into the eyes of the men standing in front of him, he knew one thing for sure, he was in way over his head, and the real fight was just beginning. The stakes were higher than ever. And the danger was only just starting to reveal itself. The night had descended on the house, but it was far from peaceful. The son felt his blood run cold as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat. The men weren't just after the truth, they were after him, and they would stop at nothing to ensure he didn't uncover what they were hiding. His father had been right all along, there was no walking away from this. There was no turning back. The conspiracy was too vast, too far-reaching. But in that moment, as the men closed in on him, the son felt something shift inside him. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something deeper. A sense of resolve. He wasn't going to let them take him down without a fight. He wasn't going to let the truth be buried, no matter the cost. But as he looked into the eyes of the men standing in front of him, he knew one thing for sure: he was in way over his head, and the real fight was just beginning. The stakes were higher than ever. And the danger was only just starting to reveal itself. The night had descended on the house, but it was far from peaceful. The son felt his blood run cold as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat. The men weren't just after the truth, they were after him, and they would stop at nothing to ensure he didn't uncover what they were hiding. His father had been right all along. There was no walking away from this. There was no turning back. The conspiracy was too vast, too far-reaching. But in that moment, as the men closed in on him, the son felt something shift inside him. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something deeper. A sense of resolve. He wasn't going to let them take him down without a fight. He wasn't going to let the truth be buried, no matter the cost. But as he looked into the eyes of the men standing in front of him, he knew one thing for sure: he was in way over his head, and the real fight was just beginning. The stakes were higher than ever. And the danger was only just starting to reveal itself. The night had descended on the house, but it was far from peaceful. The son felt his blood run cold as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat. The men weren't just after the truth, they were after him, and they would stop at nothing to ensure he didn't uncover what they were hiding. His father had been right all along. There was no walking away from this. There was no turning back. The conspiracy was too vast, too far-reaching. But in that moment, as the men closed in on him, the son felt something shift inside him. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something deeper. A sense of resolve. He wasn't going to let them take him down without a fight. He wasn't going to let the truth be buried, no matter the cost. But as he looked into the eyes of the men standing in front of him, he knew one thing for sure: he was in way over his head, and the real fight was just beginning. The stakes were higher than ever. And the danger was only just starting to reveal itself. The night had descended on the house, but it was far from peaceful. He knew where he had to go: the basement. His father's study. The hidden room. The one place he had been warned not to venture. But he wasn't afraid anymore. The clues had pointed to it from the start, and now, this was his only shot. He had to know. He had to find the final piece of the puzzle. The basement was dimly lit, the air heavy with dust and neglect. He raced down the stairs, every step echoing in the hollow silence. As he reached the door to his father's study, he hesitated for a moment. What would he find inside? Could he trust his instincts? Or was this just another trap, another lie waiting to catch him in its snare? With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The room was just as he remembered, cluttered, filled with old papers and files. But there, in the far corner, was something different. A small, metal box, hidden beneath a pile of books, its lock cracked open as if it had been disturbed recently. His pulse quickened as he approached it, knowing this was it, the moment of truth. The moment that could shatter everything or make sense of it all. He opened the box, and inside, there was a single manila folder. No name. No markings. Just a simple file that seemed so insignificant, yet he knew it held the key to everything. With trembling hands, he opened it, and the truth exploded in front of him like a bombshell. The folder was filled with documents, witness statements, bank records, surveillance reports, and photographs. But the most shocking revelation came at the very end: a series of photos showing his father, his own flesh and blood, standing side by side with the very men who had been threatening him. Not only had his father been involved with them, but he had been leading them. His father was the mastermind of the entire operation, the orchestrator of the conspiracy that had ruined so many lives, including their own. And Sophie. She wasn't just a bystander. She had been working with them the entire time, feeding him false information, leading him down a path that would eventually force him to confront the truth, their truth. The son's knees buckled beneath him as he processed the revelation. His mind spun, his chest tightened, and the room seemed to close in on him. The father who had taught him, loved him, raised him, was the one pulling the strings all along. The man he had trusted, the man he had fought to protect, was the very one responsible for everything that had happened. The father had orchestrated it all, the disappearance of his mother, the web of lies, the manipulation of everyone around him. It was all part of a game, a twisted game of control and power, and his father had been at the center of it all. But as the son looked at the pictures, a sick realization began to settle in. There was something even more terrifying than the truth. In the last photograph, there was a new face, someone he didn't recognize. A person in the background, standing behind his father and the men in suits. The face was blurred, intentionally obscured, but the shape of the figure, the posture, it looked too familiar. His blood ran cold as he recognized the hairline, the jawline, the stance. It was him. It was a younger version of himself. He stumbled back, the walls spinning, as the reality of what he was seeing hit him like a freight train. His father had been grooming him. His whole life had been manipulated to lead him to this moment. The son hadn't been fighting for justice. He hadn't been chasing the truth. He had been part of the conspiracy all along, crafted, shaped, and controlled from the very start. The basement door slammed open behind him, and the two men in suits entered, their faces devoid of emotion. But as they saw what he had uncovered, they didn't need to speak. The truth was already out, and it had made its mark. The son looked at them, his body trembling with anger, disbelief, and betrayal. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why me?" One of the men stepped forward, a faint smirk crossing his lips. "Because, son, you were always meant to be part of this. You were chosen from the start. It was always about you." The son's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that he had never been in control of his own life. He had been nothing more than a pawn, and now, with the truth out, there was no way to stop the chaos that would follow. They had won. But the son, despite the crushing weight of betrayal, still had one card left to play. In a final, desperate move, he grabbed the stack of papers and threw them into the air, scattering the truth across the room. "You can have your lies," he spat. "But I'll never be your puppet." As the papers fluttered to the ground, the room fell into an eerie silence. The truth was out, but what it meant, what would happen next, remained a mystery. The son had uncovered the secrets, but the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And with that, everything he thought he knew crumbled, leaving only chaos and uncertainty in its wake. The game was far from finished, and in the end, no one would emerge unscathed. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a pale light through the cracked blinds of the room. The house, once filled with the echoes of chaos, now lay in an unsettling stillness. The son sat alone at the kitchen table, his hands trembling as he stared at the scattered papers in front of him. The truth was out. Everything had come crashing down around him, but for the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. No more threats. No more lies. No more people pulling the strings. It was over. But was it really? As the moments stretched, he found himself reflecting on everything that had happened, the messages, the betrayal, the faces of those who had once been his family, his allies. His father, who had spent so many years hiding behind a veil of affection, was now a shadow of the man he had been. The man who had raised him, taught him, and protected him had been the architect of the very nightmare the son had struggled to escape. Sophie, too, had played her part, carefully maneuvering him toward the truth but withholding so much, leaving him to discover it all on his own. The anger he had felt, the desperation to unravel the mystery, had led him down a path he could never unwalk. In the end, he had uncovered it all, the manipulation, the betrayal, the dark truth, but none of it had been enough to change the past. Yet, as he sat there in the quiet aftermath, he realized that this moment, this strange peace he felt, was the result of his own strength. He had broken free. He had seen through the lies, peeled back the layers of deceit, and confronted the darkness that had haunted his family. He hadn't just survived, he had won. And that victory, however hollow it may have felt, was his. The weight of his father's actions, the twisted path his life had taken, couldn't erase the one thing that remained, his ability to choose. He had chosen to fight for the truth, to stand up to the very forces that had sought to control him. But in the corner of his mind, there was a lingering question that refused to go away. Was it really over? The papers he had uncovered, the final piece of evidence that had exposed everything, were still in his hands. The conspiracy might have crumbled, the people who had been behind it all scattered or arrested, but there was something else, something deeper. The truth had been laid bare, yes, but the world he had known had never truly been his. It had always been a carefully constructed illusion, and now that it was gone, what was left? Who was he now, without the weight of the lies that had defined him for so long? He thought of his mother, who had disappeared all those years ago, and he wondered if she had known the truth all along. Had she, too, been a part of the plan, or had she been another casualty of it? The unanswered questions lingered, hovering like shadows in the back of his mind, pulling him back into the mystery he had fought so hard to escape. There were still so many things he didn't know, so many things he might never understand. But he also knew this: he couldn't keep searching for answers that might not be there. He had to move forward, even if the path ahead was uncertain, even if the truth was still out of reach. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. He wasn't surprised when Sophie walked in, her eyes filled with something between guilt and hope. She hesitated for a moment, and the son could see the weight of everything that had passed between them. She had been a part of the conspiracy, yes, but in the end, she had been just as trapped as he had been. She had never been the enemy, just another player caught in the web of lies spun by his father and the others. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I should have told you everything from the start." He looked at her for a long moment, his mind racing. He didn't know what to say, or if there was anything left to say. There were no simple answers here, no easy resolution. But in that moment, as he looked into her eyes, he saw something understanding. She hadn't been the villain. She had been lost, just as he had been. And maybe, just maybe, they could both find a way out of the mess his father had left them in. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said quietly, "but I'm done fighting. I'm done with the past. Whatever happens next, I want to live for myself. I want to find a future that's mine." Sophie nodded, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to say. The damage had been done, and yet, there was something in the air between them, something that suggested that perhaps, in time, there could be healing. The son stood up from the table and walked toward the window, the light of the early morning spilling across the room. The world outside looked unchanged. The streets were quiet, the city as it always had been, full of people going about their lives, oblivious to the storm that had just passed through. But for him, everything was different. He wasn't the same person who had walked into this house, desperate to uncover the truth. He had faced the darkness, confronted his own demons, and emerged from the ashes. And as he stood there, looking out at the world, he knew that there was no simple resolution, no neat bow to tie around the mess that had been his life. The conspiracy was over, but the scars would remain. The pieces of his past, the things he had uncovered, would always be with him, a part of who he was. He couldn't change that. But he could choose how to move forward. He could choose to keep going, to find a new purpose, to create a life that was truly his. As the camera slowly pulled back, the last image of the son standing alone at the window lingered. A new chapter had begun for him, one where the past no longer had a hold on him. But even as the scene faded to black, one question remained: what was the cost of the truth, and was it worth it? The screen cut to black, the haunting uncertainty of the story echoing in the silence. The son had found his peace, but the world was still out there waiting, watching, filled with mysteries yet to be uncovered. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, the next story was already beginning.